Hello, everyone. This is Jonathan Little for PokerNews.com. Today we have Pocket Jacks, which is always fantastic. We are on the button, which is exactly where you want to be. We are playing very early in a live poker tournament. We are playing about 200 big blinds deep, so we have lots to play. And we face a raise from a 40-year-old guy from second position. So this is a spot where I think you very often want to raise, mainly because your hand's great and you're in position. And if you don't raise with this hand, you really can't have much of a 3-bet bluffing range, because if you're trying to be anywhere near balanced, if you're only 3-betting with aces, kings, queens, and ace-king, well, that's just not very many combinations of hands, so that makes it to where you're going to have a more difficult time bluffing. But if you think your opponent's particularly weak, quite often you don't want to do a whole lot of 3-betting before the flop anyway, because you should just be happy to call and see a flop, because presumably you're going to have a post-flop advantage. It's very important to understand that in tournaments especially, you really want to get your opponents into situations where they are uncomfortable. And you're going to find that most live poker players know how to navigate pre-flop spots decently well, and they know how to play the flop decently well, but the turn in the river, quite often a lot of these players become lost. So that leads me to want to call, in general, with a few more hands. I would still just 3-bet aces, kings, queens, and ace-king for value. And as for bluffs, I'm probably not doing a whole lot of bluffing here at all, so I would be 3-betting perhaps with a very exploitative range of just good hands. And if your opponents are going to exploit you, that's obviously a problem, but most people aren't going to exploit you. They're just going to play straightforwardly. So now a 30-year-old guy makes it 325 from the small blind. So my 150 I called. Now the small blind makes it 325. This is virtually always going to be a very strong hand, because this player is essentially saying, I think my hand is so good that I'm going to give you all, 4 or 5 or 6 to 1 pot odds to call, and I'm going to take that out of position. And it's hard to do that because, which hands actually have that much equity? And the answer is aces. So if your opponents, really your opponent shouldn't be doing this much of anything, because with aces especially, you typically are going to want to make it a little bit bigger, probably about the size of the pot, which would be in this scenario maybe 650 or so. From out of position, and that's going to cut down on your opponent's implied odds, because notice if we have a hand like pocket fours, and we're certainly going to call 175 more, and we're only going to put money in the flop after the flop if we make a set. And really, same thing with a hand like pocket jacks to some extent. If it comes like 9-4-2 and I have pocket jacks and they check to me, I'll probably start going for value. But this is a spot where I'm certainly not going to go too crazy, especially if an overcard comes. So I'm just going to call. Notice if I re-raise and the 30-year-old guy actually has a good hand, we're just putting more money in bad. And he may even decide to slow play, which would, of course, be a disaster if he does have a big hand. This guy may have a hand like 9-8 suited that he's getting really frisky with, and I just think that's not a good play in general, because you really just do not want to give your opponents amazing odds in position versus you. So it's kind of hard to come up with a realistic range that a good player would make this small re-raise size with. So whenever that's the case, typically you want to assume that your opponent is making some sort of an error. That's often the opposite of what you want to do, because normally, if you assume your opponents play well and then you play reasonably against someone who plays well, if your opponent plays worse than someone who plays well, if they play poorly, then whatever you're doing versus someone who plays well is going to work out well enough versus someone who's playing poorly. But if you assume your opponent's playing poorly, whereas in reality he's just playing great, well, now that's going to lead to you making humongous errors. So usually it's ideal to play as if your opponent is at least competent until you know otherwise. But when you see someone make it 325 from the small blind here, you can all of a sudden assume he's not competent. And if he's not competent, what do people who are not competent make this re-raise size with? It's almost always going to be a premium hand. All right. Ace 8-2. Check. This guy checks. I'm definitely going to check behind. If I bet with pocket jacks on ace 8-2, I'm only going to get called by an ace, maybe pocket kings, maybe pocket queens, maybe pocket tens, but that's about it. So we're just going to check behind, and if we get to check to showdown, that's probably just fine. I don't think we need to try to bluff someone off pocket jacks. Off pocket kings or something like that. You're going to find that in general, when you lose to only a few combinations of hands, when you beat only a few combinations of hands, what am I trying to say? I'm getting tongue-tied here. My baby's screaming in the background. Hopefully you can't hear it. With pocket jacks, if you can only make queens and kings fold, you typically just want to accept that you're going to lose to those hands. because an ace is just never going to fold. And I do think some people will 3-bet tiny from out of position with a hand like ace-king and then check the flop. And also notice the 40-year-old guy over there could also just have an ace and check the flop, kind of for the same reason I'm playing my pocket jacks cautiously. Maybe he would play a hand like ace-jack or ace-queen cautiously because he realizes that if he bets and gets raised, or if he bets and even the 30-year-old guy calls, he may not be in a very good spot. So this is a spot where I think we just need to play cautiously and understand we're probably not winning this spot. And it's okay to not win this pot. I think that's what a lot of people don't understand. They think that with pocket jacks, you have to do everything you can to try to win. But whenever you call the initial pre-flop raise, certainly that's going to be a profitable decision. Whenever you call the minimum re-raise in position, obviously that's going to be a profitable situation for me. And now that the flop comes, ace something something, we don't really have a profitable spot anymore, so we're just going to get out of the way. On the turn, 30-year-old guy bets 850. Other guy calls. We have a very, very easy fold here of pocket jacks. I would also fold pocket kings here if I had kings somehow. With a hand like jack 10 there, I would also fold. With a hand like ace 10, or ace 9, I would definitely fold, but I'm never going to have ace 9. With a hand like ace jack, I'd probably fold. With a hand like ace queen, I think I would probably call, although it'd be close. Ace king I would call as well. Ace 10 would I raise? Yeah, probably. Whenever you have ace 10, it's really difficult for your opponent to have pocket aces or pocket 8s or pocket 10s because you have the two blockers to that. And most likely you're going to be against ace king or ace queen or ace jack at that point, or nothing. So you want to go ahead and raise to price out the, quote unquote nothing, which will be draws and maybe stuff like pocket jacks. And if you also get a lot of money in versus hands like ace king and ace queen. So you probably want to raise with ace 10 here. I would raise with any 2 pair on the turn. Okay, anyway, I folded. Turns a queen. Let's just play the hand out. On the river, we have a bet and a call from the 30-year-old guy, and the 40-year-old guy calls, and pocket aces from the small blind. Can't say I'm shocked. And the 40-year-old guy with ace queen, who rivered 2 pair, did very good to just call here. I think this is a spot where a lot of players do play a little bit too aggressively. And I mentioned on the turn I would have raised with 2 pair. If I had 2 pair on the river somehow, I would not have raised. And the reason for that is because you're trying to get called by exactly ace-king. And even in that spot, even if ace-king does call you, certainly aces, queens, and 10s and 8s are all going to call you if those are in your opponent's range. So I think that would be a slightly profitable raise with ace-queen in terms of chips. But given in tournaments, your main goal, or one of your main goals, is to not play huge pots unless you are reasonably confident you have the best hand or a lot of fold equity, you should probably avoid playing for all the money here on the river, even if you do have something like a 55% edge. If you start to get something like a 60% edge or more, well, you probably be willing to take it. So that's going to be it for this hand. This really just does illustrate how, notice in this pot we lost 6 big blinds with pocket jacks. And that's perfectly fine. It's okay to lose 6 big blinds with pocket jacks. You cannot let that bother you. And in reality, you should be very happy because we didn't lose much money at all. If you enjoyed this hand, definitely check out the free trial over at pokercoaching.com. There we have a lot of hand quizzes. And, some of them are just as simple as this, where you get a normally good hand, but you face aggression that is a little bit abnormal. And that should perhaps induce you to play a little bit more snugly. Alternatively, this hand certainly could have played out where we 3-bet, maybe even 4-bet with a hand like pocket jacks, and we end up playing a big pot. So do not think that I'm just always playing these hands very cautiously, because that's certainly not the case. And in general, if you're not going for value with your absolute best hands, you're probably playing way too tightly. So again, you can get a free trial over at pokercoaching.com, take the quizzes, and see how your skills stack up. Thank you very much for watching this video on pokernews.com. Be sure to check back next week for another one.